one you bought. We have an older car that has a dual capacity for playback, and the color is right. So we're not sure exactly where all this will go. We've been told by some folks that are knowledgeable that what we really need to do is put all this on the web, and then you can access the web. You can download it to your personal computer. You could load it to a audio cassette or to a CD player, whatever you want it to do. It'd be totally up to you. How many of you feel you have the expertise for doing that right now? Well, it's 5. I need to talk to you afterwards. My concern is when I look at our forum membership and where they're located and what I know about them, I don't know how many of them would have the wherewithal at the present time. And I'm not sure how large a newsletter it would take to give them instructions in how to do this. But anyway, Michael, when you feel ready over there, come forth and speak to us. And again, after we've gone through the written questions, we'll have microphones set up so that you can come to those mics and ask a question orally. Time's yours, Mike.
There was a question about oil, and I guess you could argue that oil in and of itself may not be exactly why we're there, but the problem is that every country uses this stuff, you see, and so really it is the issue because with a global economy, if that's somehow disrupted, the Gulf is blocked, they decide to do something to restrict oil, there's going to be a huge problem. Now, one thing that I don't understand, we know that I mentioned in 1938, oil was discovered, and the Wahhabis, apparently the Sunni, they don't like that term. It's kind of a negative term. But at any rate, I'm talking about the extremists, you see. The Wahhabism, the guy who lived back in 1700, that got this whole thing started about we got to get back to our roots. Now it's interesting when I was reading some of this stuff, it kind of sounded like some of the stuff we say sometimes, but but seriously, there are good Islamic people. But my point here is that oil has fueled this insurgency, this terrorists. They can buy whatever they want to buy, whether it be a bomb and they can transport it wherever they want to transport it, and that's a threat to us. Now why is it? And now we're dealing with Iran. So why is it that there isn't more talk in our Congress about becoming energy independent? In the short term, we could use oil shale, we could drill offshore, we could Anwar, we could go to Alaska, short term. But long term, why can't we have a Manhattan Project to come up with an alternate energy source? Because once the oil prices drop, and that's one of Victor David Hanson's arguments. One of the things we should do with Iran is once we do that, and the oil prices drop, then they'll throw that guy out, Ahmadinejad, or however you say that name. They'll throw him out, you see, because they've got lots of money now, but once the oil prices drop down to $30 and $20 a barrel, they'll throw him out. We do have there was some questions about what is said, and certainly we have free speech, we have a free society, but there also has to be consequences to what is said, and I guess we could talk about that for a long time. In World War II, there were definite restrictions put on the media, on the soldiers. Letters were read before they came home. Well, now with the World Wide Web, things are sent home immediately, and the Army's starting to talk about maybe we ought to take a look at this a little bit. But where I was going with this, of course, was people have, and I guess as I get older and I see what goes on in every facet of our life, there's somehow a political element to this thing, you see, to almost everything we do. And people hate George Bush so much, and I'll say more about that in a minute. People hate him so much that they're going to oppose the war, and they're going to use that as a political device against him. Whether it's good or bad, they're doing it because they hate George Bush, you see. Now, let me back up a minute here, because there's something called civil-military relationships. Our military, we don't have a military dictatorship. We have a civilian at the top. Now, there's a book just came out, and I was just starting to read it, and it talks about this relationship through the different presidencies, back with Roosevelt and Truman and Eisenhower, on up through Kennedy and Nixon and so forth, Clinton and Bush. Now, there's something called the Goldwater-Nichols, which there's always turmoil in the government. But who's the top dog? Who gets to have FaceTime with the president? You see, and who makes the final decision? And so they came up with this Goldwater-Nichols Act, and that did a whole bunch of things. But one of the things it did was it made the chairman of the Joint Chiefs the advisor to the president. The advisor to the president on military affairs. The advisor. That's the law. But what's happened here, the way President Bush he's an MBA, the way he runs things is a little bit different. He gave Mr. Rumsfeld a tremendous amount of power, such that the Joint Chiefs had to go through Rumsfeld to get to the president, you see. So there was no direct advice to the president. And the military folks were kind of almost second-class citizens. Now I'll tell you that in the medical world, you don't rub shoulders with, in the military, you don't rub shoulders with these guys too much, these war fighters. But one of the things I had to do, because I was the 3rd Army surgeon, I was the advisor to the 3-star. I was his medical advisor. I had to brief him, and I had to talk to him. So it was my first experience working with these guys. And these guys are bright people. They didn't get there just because they put in time. The military is a very pyramid-type system. You have to perform. You have to be evaluated. And only a very small percentage of the people get to the top. But they get there because of performance, not because of they're nice guys. So my experience with these guys is they're extremely intelligent. And the other thing that after Vietnam, what happened was it was realized or recognized that senior military officers had to be able to be conversant with political leaders. And so the requirement was that as you get promoted up the chain, you not only go to the Army War College, but you go and you get an advanced degree. So General Petraeus has a PhD from Princeton. And they go to different places and they learn to read and to write, and so they're very bright people. And so when these people were kind of discarded, it kind of started a chain of events that wasn't good. And I think everybody understands that, and I won't go through them, but there was a tremendous number of mistakes that were made in the first few years. I won't go into them now, but one of those though is that you heard about the reforming the military, and so forth, making it smaller, lighter, all this stuff. Well, that was fine, but the problem, you see, we're in this post-Cold War era. So when you go into a country, the military fights the war. It's supposed to provide stabilization, but how do you build up the liberal institutions, the rule of law, banking, industry, all the resources that are lagging right now, telephones, oil, water, sewage, just all those basic. How do you build those things up? Well, you need to bring all the other institutions into the picture. So the State Department, USAID, and they haven't gone through this revolution yet. This change that needs to take place. They're still have this Cold War mentality, and to build these countries up takes a lot of resources. It isn't just the military. So a lot of mistakes were made. Let me see if I can be a little more targeted here. It says here about the professionals leaving Iraq, and they're leaving in droves. They call it the brain drain. And so until there's some security, people can walk the streets and go out and work in the sewer, get the water going, get the power flowing without getting blown up. That's going to continue. So there are some encouraging. General McCaffrey says in his paper here, there are some encouraging signs here, but it's not a for sure thing. But we need to get the people in there, give it a few months, and then go from there. So I don't know what the answer is to all this. Certainly we have to have some benchmarks. I mean, that's how we all need to have those things. We need to have a goal. We need to work toward that thing, and we're going to measure it by whatever. And then go to the next one. But we have to be a little bit careful that General Petraeus was put into position. Everybody authorized it. Now we need to give him some time. Can't give him forever, but something seems to be happening. So it's encouraging. There's a question about the jus bellum, the just war, and I guess I can't comment too much about that. I think there's been a lot written, a lot. We're not in an ideal world. We can't be idealists. At some point, we have to be realists. There are bad things that happen, and we need to do something about it. And what we need to do, this idea of proportionality, and rules, and that's the rules of engagement and the rules of war. We try not to kill women and children. We try to target the bad guys and so forth. You see, and we've done a pretty good job, but we're not perfect. And I don't think I need to say too much more about this Islamic view of us. When we have sometimes it's not always honest and above board, but when we have these discussions and sometimes battles over differing points of view, because that's the way we do things, and we have freedom of speech, they view that as that isn't the way things are done. And the Islamic world is in a quandary here, because the way really the modern world of Islam started in 1798 when Napoleon went into Egypt, and they talked about equality, which that's great because everybody in the Islamic world is equal. There's not a hierarchical system. So there were some good things there, but they see if you're not one of them, and you're an infidel. If you're a non-believer, you're a woman or you're a slave. Those people are not equal. You see there, and so it's interesting. You all know Joan Coggin. When she went to Saudi Arabia, she was out driving a car, and that's a no-no. So I'm not sure how she got away with that, but. Well, I'll just, somebody asked here about elements in our society that believe most likely to cause disintegration from within, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but how about just family values, Now, they say what's happening. There's discussion whether or not there's a civil war. And there is a low level of civil war, and I guess it depends how you define it and so forth. But somebody wanted to know about Shiites killing Sunnis, and certainly they're doing that. But there's the AKI, there's Al Qaeda in Iraq, and there's something like 40 or 50 other organizations that's goal. I mean, they're not pure Sunni, they're not pure Shia. They're these terrorist organizations that are trying to disrupt this whole thing, and there is some Sunni on Shia, but it's these fringe elements that are causing the problem. And what's interesting, what General McCaffrey said here is that in Anbar province, which is the bad place, Ramadi and Fallujah, is that now some of these tribal leaders are recognizing that we need to get in and we need to vote, and that there's these bad guys here and we need to fight them, and they're actually starting to do it. And that's what needs to happen, doesn't it? We can't solve their problems. We can provide some help and some security, but until they take ownership of their country, which appears, at least in some provinces, they're starting to do, that maybe they'll be able to pull things together. There was a couple questions about Vietnam here, and there was a paper just written about criticizing the senior military leadership for not speaking out. When, for instance, Rumsfeld said this is the way we're going to do things, and you remember the 4-star who said we're going to need I don't remember what number he said, 300,000 troops in there after the war. Well, he was summarily gotten rid of. Shinseki, and then Secretary White was let go because he agreed with Shinseki. So this was whether this was right or not is I guess we could debate that all day long. But Rumsfeld saw it his way, and if you didn't agree with him, anybody who was going to the 3-star and 4-star level, nominated for 3-star and 4-star, were called in and asked, do you basically agree with me? And if they didn't, they didn't get promoted. So we have a civilian leader at the top, and I think that sometimes causes problems. But it has to be that way, and like I said, when you start reading about this stuff, if you don't agree with something, then our chance is to vote. That's how we change things. So schools definitely are opening. Women definitely are going to school. That's one thing I know. I know personally. I've seen many. Our troops are building many schools, and one of the things the bad guys do is they come in and blow these things up as soon as we build them. So. It has to do with the care of all patients. One of the problems with dealing with the women is, and the problem in the whole Iraqi health system is, you have to have women nurses because you can't have men examining women. So, fortunately, our medical system in the military has a lot of women, and that's something that's very important to them. Women can't have a man examining a woman, so that actually worked out pretty well. Somebody asked about percentage increase of Muslim converts since September 11. I'll just give you a little anecdote here. I read in Germany, the German school system allows for some religion during their school time. There's a number of Islamic people who wanted some Islamic education, so they went to Turkey to get the book. Turkey is a moderate Islamic, pro-American system. The German government would not let them use that book because it was government. It was a government book. And so guess who came in? It was these schools you hear about that preach radical stuff. They came in, and we all know a number of the very extreme terrorists have come from Germany. And the madrasas, yeah, the madras, yeah. We talked a little bit about the timetable. I think it's okay to have some benchmarks, but we're kind of an instant gratification society. It seems to me. We want a pill for something. We want to go to the doctor and have a problem taken care of. We don't want this war to go on forever, and I'm not sure it has to go on forever, but it's tough to get it over with within a short period of time, especially with some of the mistakes we made at the beginning. It's very different. We're dealing with I mentioned this center of gravity business. See, it's an ideology that we're dealing with, and not a person. I mean, you can get rid of OBL, Bin Laden. You can get rid of these guys, but the thing goes on just. So it's an ideology we're dealing with, and how do you do that? So there was one here about the church support Sabbath problems. My observation was that there were small groups who met. The military, what I saw in the year I was there, they were very tolerant, and obviously most people took. I mentioned before, you get into this weekly cycle. You have to almost. When you're over there, you're not with your family. You're not. There's nothing else to do too much. I mean, there's a few things to do, but if you're not careful, you lose track of time. You don't know it's Monday, Sunday. You hardly know what time it is, and so you have to start dictating. This is your day off. Most everybody took Sunday off, and churches. I mean, they were pleading for more chaplains because they were just overwhelmed with there were so many people who wanted to be involved with religious services. So the point here is that the small number of Adventists I knew had no problem. We had a small group there in Camp Arifjan in Kuwait. There was some in Afghanistan I knew. So now, obviously, if there was an event, something going on, nobody got any time off. But in general, they were very tolerant of taking time off. I mentioned this guy Gary Council, who is I don't remember the name of the organization there, the servicemen's group there at the GC. He's very busy working on this though, and in general things are going well. But I think more important here, we have young kids in their formative years here who may not at this stage in their life be exactly in agreement with the way we do things, and they may not have any conviction one way or the other, but they're still a part of the church, and I think it's incumbent on us to stay in touch, and it does a lot when you're there by yourself, away from home, to get a letter from somebody who says we're thinking about you. like I said, I'm older. I think I can shoulder it a little easier. But if you're 18 or 20 years old, I think it's a little harder. And I think that if we do reach out and tell them we're thinking about them, and maybe we're talking to their families, they'll remember that. I probably didn't cover every single thing here, but why don't we just take a few questions with the mic if we can?
I'm going to ask you the first one. Well, you may come to the microphones here if you have one. Dr. Walter, what should be the Adventist Church's public stance on support for this war, or whatever we want to call it? And what would be the effect of that? If the Review came out with a front page article saying the Adventist Church is, and then you define its role in terms of its perception of this war. To my knowledge, we've never done that. We just have a war going on. So my question is, should we do that? What would be the effect? Would it be beneficial for the overall church? Would it be politically astute? Would it be suicide?
Yeah,
simple question. Go right ahead.
I don't think, first of all, I mean, with the separation of church and state, we cannot come out with a political position. I mean, there are some churches who have done that, and among other things, you get into trouble. But the Bible does say you render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and so there is some things that so I don't think we can make a policy about supporting one position or another. So I think it comes down to an individual church thing where we support each other. I'd have to, I guess, defer maybe to some greater minds here, but I think it's something we need to discuss at some level, because my perception, this is me now, is that because of I think it's people who've gone through been in the military and gone through some horrendous experiences that no longer is there. Different organization, but I think we tend to look sometimes at people who join the military as second-class citizens, and there must be something wrong with them, and so we try to, it's kind of like, what do you do in your church when somebody gets divorced? Isn't it hard to sometimes relate to those people? Well, maybe it's the same. Somebody joins the military. Sometimes it seems to me it's hard for some of our people to relate to them now that they've chosen this other path, and like it's not an honorable one. So I think we do need to think about it. And but I guess one place to start is we may not agree with a person's position. In the medical world, we don't have to kill people, but there are those in our church, our young members, who do join the infantry. They're in the Marines, and they kill people. But does that mean we distance ourselves from them? We may not agree with their decision, but we can still be Christians and still be reach out to them and tell them that we love them.
Just put away your weapon. Oh, okay. Les, I think you're ready to come to a microphone.
Well, it's an interesting one, because this is something we could spend a lot of time with. Maybe we should all be pacifists, because if you do join the military, we've tended to say that in the chaplains and the medicals, okay, but in some ways, by doing that, we're saying it's okay for you to pull the trigger, and I'll take care of you, and I'll supply you, and I'll feed you, and I'll do all this, but you pull the trigger, but I can't do it. It doesn't seem completely congruent to me. So, but I have absolutely no problem with people being pacifists, as long as they'll recognize that they can be a pacifist. They can say whatever they want to say, because we have a country that allows us to do that. And one of the reasons is because these guys here. It's not an idealist would never agree with this, but as a realist, it's an imperfect world.
I'm going to ask another question while Les comes there. Any of you here who were part of the Medical Cadet Corps in eons gone by? There are several of you like that. So you went in to serve, but in a specific capacity. No triggers being pulled, right? Okay. Les, your comment. Question.
My question is, I guess I have two questions. Number one, I'm one that takes great umbrage at the spin that's been put upon us, that if you disagree with the policy in the Middle East, that you don't support the troops. I'd like to hear your comment on that.
I agree with that. You know, certainly we don't have to agree with everything our government does, but I think the only thing is and we can say whatever we want as long as we realize that there may be consequences to what we say and how we say it. But I agree with you. We ought to be able to. We don't have to agree 100%.
I came this close to going to Vietnam, but people rose up in this country and had something to say about Vietnam, and it brought that war to an end. So I guess my question is this: two questions. Did anyone ever tell George Bush that if you, as the Bible says, get rid of one devil, that 7, after you exorcise 1, 7 may come in? Number one. And number two, I think you've said that you agree that if enough of the American people stand up and say enough is enough, that a civilian leadership or even a military leadership, if you please, if there was a head of the military alone, that the American people would say this war has to end.
Well, I said in my introduction, my written introduction, that whether we should have gone in is an academic discussion to be left for another time. And I think seriously, if you took a lot of the senior military leadership and looked at a strategy, see, you know, one of the problems for a political party, a president, is you have a limited amount of time and you want to accomplish something and you want to do it quickly. But this is something that can't happen quickly. It's got to be a strategy. It's a very complicated strategy, this whole Middle East thing. And how do you get a short-term result? And I think I can't speak for them, but I think if you and some of them have retired. Some of the senior military people have retired. But I think if you I know the one I work for, he wasn't very vocal about it because, you know, when they're given orders, they go ahead and do it. But unless it's immoral or illegal. But if I think if you polled a lot of these people, they would say probably not. This wouldn't have been a good thing to do. You know, there was other things we could have done short of this attack. And you all know. The planning that went into this thing was a little bit short-sighted because the intelligence said that we were going to be welcomed with open arms. And if you look at history, if you look at other things, there's no way that was going to happen. So it's I don't know how you answer this in a few short minutes here, but it is it is an interesting question. The problem now is we're in there, and how do we calm this whole region? It isn't just Iraq; it's the whole region that's in turmoil here. And don't think for a minute that one country is not a little bit happy with what's going on over here, and if something else, they're thinking all the angles here. So.
Okay. Question to the right.
Reach it. Can you hear me? A little short here. I was wondering how many in this room besides myself has read the book A Table in His Presence by Chaplain David Cash. Am I the only one that's read it? Well, get a book and read it. It's awesome. The first group that went in to Iraq, He was the chaplain in that group. And before they went in, they all knelt and prayed. They had a couple atheists in the group that bowed their head, but he put his hand on the head of each man as they knelt and asked God's blessing and protection on them before they got into their vehicles and started across. And he tells the story of the miracle after miracle that happened. By the time they got to Saddam's palace, they were the ones that took his palace. He was standing there. All of a sudden, a line started forming of men, soldiers begging to be baptized and saying, "This is what I saw." Bullets would be coming at me, straight at me, and it would stop in midair and drop at my feet. Story after story like this. Humvee was hit directly, a direct hit. There was 4 or 5 guys in there, and everybody that saw it was sure they were all dead. They all climbed out. They had no wounds on them at all, but the Humvee was destroyed. Just story after story like this. Another man was on top of a vehicle where was a gun mounted up there, and the procession had stopped, and he felt someone was watching him, and he looked just in time to see an Iraqi in the bushes with a gun right on him, and he said, "I was a dead man because there's no way I could swing my gun around to get him before he got me." He said, "But I could see him. He was close enough. His eyes got bigger and bigger, and he dropped his gun and started running the other way and started screaming, and other men were there that he didn't even notice in the bushes until they started dropping their guns and running too. And he just shook his head like, what happened? It was unbelievable. And I just wanted to know if anybody's read this. I do believe my personal opinion is that God sent us in there.
Did you have a question for Dr. Walter?
I was just wondering if he had seen many miracles over there.
Well, not like that. I'll tell you, every war things are learned on the medical side. I'm talking about here, and when you see what our medics are doing, to me it's a miracle. Saving these kids. Have you seen some of the computerized limbs now that they have? Some of these guys without legs or arms have these computerized limbs so they can run, climb mountains, and they're even allowing them to stay in the military and function. Maybe not what they were doing, but I mean, to me that's a miracle. Yeah.
Question over here.
Sure, it's my first time here, and first of all, I appreciate the discussion that's going on. A friend of mine invited me here, and I think it's an important discussion that I wish I would see more Adventists partaking in. I was torn by this war, actually. I had the honor and the privilege of, I think, being one of the few Adventists that served in this administration. I was helped start the Department of Homeland Security and worked in many different aspects of it, and met a lot of the decision makers from the civilian side. So when the president had decided to go to war, everybody was okay with going into Afghanistan, but the coin toss was Iraq. Really, everybody wasn't sure if the president was going to pull the trigger on that. When he did, it was a difficult time, I think, psychologically for a lot of people. I have a question more so for this church and for you as far as your experience, because I had a tendency of looking at things at that time more from a heavenly perspective. We were always, I put a question up there, it was probably a little bit too lengthy for you, but I always look at things from the context of the warning that was initially given to us after the war in heaven was won. And there was a warning unto men that the war is still here on earth. And that war is played out in many different ways, as we know. Spiritually is obviously the most poignant way that we understand it, but oftentimes it's spilled out in the battlefield. So I had to accept this because this is something that God allowed to happen. Whether George Bush was in command or any other president that made this decision, I'm a realist. It's here. The question I have as an Adventist and as an American, how does this play out in my life, spiritually speaking? Who do I pray for? What do I pray for? Are there things that I need to do physically, politically? Are there things that I need to stand for as an Adventist? I see a lot of other churches out there doing their part, but I don't see very many young Adventists that are really overly concerned with this. And that's my question to you. I know it's kind of hard to say as a church that you have to make a decision, but very clearly, when I read the Bible, I see Israel as a nation constantly having to make a decision about going to war or not. And the war isn't over with here on earth. Although Christ won the victory in heaven, it still wages on. And we're in the middle of the battlefield. So my question to you is, how does this war in Iraq play out in this celestial war that's taking place here on earth? Where do you see that context?
Yeah.
An easy question. An easy one.
Well, we talk about the time of the end, and there's going to be wars and rumors of war. But I guess what I would say is, how do we as Christians involve ourselves in the world here? And that's why I put up on that slide. I think we shouldn't bury our heads in the sand. We have to be good at what we're doing, but we have to know what's going on around us. And in this country, the way we influence policy is by voting for people who we think are going to carry out those policies that we agree with. So we do have to be involved. We have to know what's going on in the world. We have to know what the candidates, which is sometimes hard, isn't it? What they really are thinking, what they believe. And I'm with Niall Ferguson. I don't think there's going to be, in the foreseeable future, I don't think there's going to be any country that's going to overtake us. I think it's going to come from within because of our moral and apathy, our religious apathy, all we're concerned about is ourselves and how many things we can get, seems like. Yes, Niall Ferguson. Yeah.
Okay, sit over here.
I'm even shorter. As to what our young people are doing, I have 3 young people that are Seventh-day Adventists. Since 9/11, I encouraged them. I said, I know Jesus says to love our enemies, but I did tell them, I said, you need to be educated. You must understand. You must have the Savior's heart, but you must understand things. The eldest went on to major in history and political science and to get a minor in doing special studies in the Middle East. And I wanted them to understand because it seemed like there weren't a lot of things that we did understand. And I really appreciated what you had to say because those things came up at our dinner table. Those details that we often wouldn't hear from the media, and where our daughter says, you need to read this and read that. Our second son went on to get his degree in government and to take a minor in Middle Eastern studies. He's teaching overseas, and he wants to go and teach. He hasn't told his father this. He wants to go and teach in an English language school in Syria, and I was going to ask, how safe do you think Syria is?
I don't know, but I think in any of these countries, there has to be some concern. We've seen on the news one of their modus operandi is kidnapping and sometimes beheading. That seems to be one of the things they do. There's been, I don't remember the number now, but there's been millions of dollars paid in ransom. So you have to do what your heart tells you to do, and if you have a conviction, then that's probably what they had to do. But understand, I think, be educated and understand what the risk is, and then if there is risk, what do you do to mitigate risk? That's a hard one. But I mean, we hear these stories all the time in South America, in India, in places that people go and they're murdered, and they're there doing good things. There's no place that's 100% safe.
The third one, I'm getting ready in 3 weeks to go and help commission him into the Air Force. And that will be, I guess, the most difficult because he is preparing to go over there and navigate and to take planes. And so this has a special place in our family's heart, by all means. My mother came here today. She is a survivor of Pearl Harbor. I wanted her to hear what you had to say because she wonders. She had first-hand experience of what happened. And I think that you've presented it very well, and I thank you beyond the few military families I know in my Adventist church.
So we all have to think and come to an understanding in our heart about what to do. And again, I think of David in the Bible. He was a warrior. There are some people who are warriors, and they're and it's in them. But all of us have to come to some sort of understanding about what we're going to do. It's easier now because we don't have a draft. You don't have to join the military. But we have to understand what's out there, what's going on, and what this radical Islamic movement is all about. Because we're all at risk, and it's already changed our way of life. Has anybody flown recently? And I use the analogy. I don't these people want to make they want to have a big event, bring down the World Trade Towers. But think about that Washington sniper, that one person, how he really caused havoc for weeks. And what would happen if one of these guys walked into a hospital, into a church, into a shopping center, or let off some anthrax? These things are very easy to obtain. What would that do to our way of life? Are we prepared for that?
Was there not also a reference in the Bible regarding David that he was a man after God's own heart?
And he was a man after God's own heart.
And a warrior. Okay, let's go to this question.
The United States has some television presence or attempts to influence the Muslim world. The Muslims have, just for all your information, in a city called Qatar, a huge television presence with 500 stations broadcasting their Muslim stuff.
Al Jazeera?
Yeah, Al Jazeera. Are we becoming effective in reaching the Muslim world with, we might say, the Western message of what our message is, or are we completely overwhelmed by the television's presence of Al Jazeera?
I don't know the complete answer to that, but I did read something just the other day. There is a this is not Radio Free America. It's another one that I don't recall the name of, but the producer is he was from CNN or but this was in Wall Street Journal this last week. It was one of the editorials. But instead of just broadcasting our message, we were putting in a lot of the things that they wanted in, and so somebody's saying, now wait a minute here, why are you putting their message in on our radio station? And so that was a little disturbing to me. So maybe we aren't doing as much as we could because. Let me tell you, but I'll tell you that in Desert Storm when I was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, you'd go down to get the newspaper. There was some English newspaper. And I think it looked like some of the letters from World War II. They had been edited. Things were blacked out that you couldn't, they didn't want you to read it, so they just blacked it out. See? So that was then, and I don't know specifically, what we're doing. I know we do have these media outlets, but actually how effective it is, I don't know. This is an interesting kind of concept here. If the media continually, now you understand, most people don't read the newspaper, listen to the Sunday morning news shows. They just don't. They sometimes listen to the radio, but if the media is constantly saying one thing, and then after a while you ask these people, you poll them and ask them, what do you think of this? What are they going to respond? How are they going to respond?
Other questions? Have we exhausted the audience?
Well, thank you.
Or just a question?
And I'll just say one thing. We always talk about the soldier, and I always want to remember them, but remember the families. I'll tell you that when I was gone, there were some people, and there were some people who were very supportive of my wife, and she's forever grateful. So it's difficult, and then I think about these young mothers with young children by themselves trying to manage the military wage of especially the enlisted, is not very much money. They're getting by on not much, and so remember them, and in your church. I don't know if you have anybody here, or if there's other churches here. See if you can find out who they are. I'll tell you what we're doing at Loma Linda. We have some very enthusiastic people. And one reason they're enthusiastic, they're mothers whose sons are in Afghanistan and Iraq, so they're very excited about this. But we've been putting boxes together at certain, like Christmas and Easter, and sending them all sorts of things, cookies. But we send them a DVD actually of the music program we have at the church at Loma Linda. And I'm just hoping that it sends a message that we care, we appreciate what you're doing, and so this is a difficult time we're going through, and I thank you for coming to this afternoon, spending a Saturday afternoon, and I hope I've been able to answer some of your questions.
We certainly thank you, and I'm just wondering, in response to his last comment, how many of you know that in your church there are servicemen over in the Middle East right now? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we have a challenge then, maybe to go back to our local churches and implement some of what we've heard today. That might be the bottom line of what we've heard. I want to remind you that your next appointment here is on June 9, when Ivan Blazin is going to tell women their real place. So please come for that event. Let's stand as we're dismissed with prayer. Again, we thank you, Heavenly Father, for the opportunity of having our understanding expanded, some of our thinking challenged. We can appreciate what we've heard today, and we realize that the solutions to the problems that we face are not easily identifiable, but that we can be informed and be participant in helping to make those decisions through our existing political process. Be with us now as we leave this place. And again, we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for being here.